the galaxy, creatures known for conquering entire worlds, came to us. Not to wage war, but to ask for help raising their children. Sounds insane, right? But when humans are the only beings their young don't try to attack, we become their only hope for peace. This isn't just a story about aliens. It's a story about trust, transformation, and the chaos of babysitting interstellar toddlers. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to the channel and show a thumbs up by liking the video. It really helps us grow. Now, let's dive into this wonderful story. Captain Nevin Silas had seen many strange things during his years commanding the Aurora Ridge, but this was something else. The message had come through encoded and urgent, flagged with the seal of the Saurak Dominion, a name that sent shivers down the spines of even the most hardened diplomats. Known for their towering warships, ruthless conquests, and a cultural holiday called the Week of Unrelenting Fury, the Saurak were not exactly known for warm gestures. So when the message arrived with the words, "Request for cooperation, childcare, initiative" in the subject line, Nevin had assumed it was a mistranslation, or a prank, maybe both. But it wasn't. When the hollow screen flickered to life in the ship's conference room, it revealed a creature over 7 feet tall, scales dark, as midnight, standing with a straight-backed authority that could silence an entire room. This was Terex, the Saurak envoy. 2 piercing amber eyes locked onto Nevan's. The room fell quiet, except for the low hum of the ship's engines and the faint scratching sound of Lieutenant Marla Kinn, the crew's behavior specialist, flipping furiously through a digital file. "Captain Silas," Terex began, voice deep and smooth like gravel polished by centuries of war. "The Saurak seek your species' assistance in an urgent matter involving our young." Nevin blinked. "I'm sorry. Could you repeat that? I think I just hallucinated a warlord asking for babysitting help." Terex's nostrils flared slightly. If that was irritation, it was impressively restrained. "It is no joke. Our offspring, younglings as you might say, require a period of supervised adaptation. We believe humans are uniquely suited for this role." Marla looked up from her screen, eyes wide. "You want us to babysit Saurak children?" "It is not mere babysitting," Terex said, not insulted, just clarifying. "It is a diplomatic and evolutionary necessity. Our young must learn cooperation, not just conquest. And your kind are oddly placed within the spectrum of their instincts." Nevin rubbed the bridge of his nose. It was going to be one of those days. "I think I'm going to need a lot more context." Terex nodded, then stepped aside to let a visual projection fill the space between them. It showed a rotating model of a Saurak youngling, smaller than the adults but still sporting rows of tiny, curved teeth and claws that could probably disassemble a toaster in under a minute. They looked like something a nightmare had designed. During its lunch break, "Our young are born with strong survival instincts," Terex explained. "They see all other life forms as either prey or threat. Threats are attacked. Prey is pursued. But humans..." He paused, tilting his head. Thoughtfully, "Your presence causes no immediate reaction in our young. You are perplexing to them." "That's the nicest thing I've heard all week," Nevin muttered. Terex's tone remained serious. "You are not aggressive enough to be threats, nor weak enough to be prey. You exist outside their instinctual categories. This makes you the ideal species to introduce them to the concept of peaceful coexistence." Marla leaned forward. "Wait, are you saying your kids don't want to eat us or fight us?" "Precisely." There was a long pause in the room as everyone digested that particular statement. Marla was the first to recover. "This is insane," she said. "Even if we agree we're not equipped to raise Saurak children, I mean, what do they even eat? Do they have bedtimes? Are they going to punch through the walls when they don't get dessert?" Terex made a sound that might have been a chuckle, though it rumbled like distant thunder. "You will be given full medical and developmental records, nutritional guides, safety protocols. These younglings are at the age where their social learning is most adaptable." Nevin studied the projection of the Saurak children. He could already imagine the headlines if this went wrong. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly. "You want to send your kids onto a human ship, filled with delicate equipment, breakable scientists, and one engineer who still thinks coffee should be classified as a food group. Terex met his gaze without hesitation. Yes. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush stars. Finally, Nevin sighed. Why humans? Surely there's a safer, saner way. Terex's eyes dimmed slightly, not with anger, but something closer to weariness. Because the galaxy is changing. Conquest has limits. We have reached ours. We must learn new ways. And we have observed humans. You survive not by strength, alone, but by connection. You build alliances, you find beauty in chaos, your species adapts. Marla looked at Nivan. Her sarcasm finally softened. They're asking for help, Nev. Real help. He didn't answer right away. There was still too much unknown. But deep down, past the wariness, past the fear of potential catastrophe, there was a spark of something else. Hope, maybe, or curiosity, or that very human desire to prove that even in a galaxy full of monsters, humanity still had something unique to offer. He looked back at Terex and gave a slow, cautious nod. All right, we'll try. And somewhere on the Sorak ship, 3 little claws tapped excitedly against the floor. The shuttle arrived early the next morning, just as the crew of the Aurora Ridge was barely finishing their first round of coffee. Captain Niven Silas stood at the docking bay with his arms crossed, trying not to let the butterflies in his stomach show. Beside him, Lieutenant Marla Kinn looked like she hadn't slept, though she swore she had only been studying Sorak childhood development patterns. Her third cup of coffee suggested otherwise. The shuttle was massive and blocky, like someone had tried to build a tank with no curves. As it landed, the deck vibrated, and several crew members instinctively took a step back. The ramp hissed open, and Terex emerged first, taller, darker, and somehow even more imposing in person. He gave a polite nod to Niven before stepping aside. Out came the younglings. They were smaller than their adult counterparts, barely 3 feet tall, but still, covered in tough, shiny scales. Each one moved with quick, calculated grace, eyes wide and curious. They didn't look particularly dangerous, but Niven knew better. The Sarek didn't raise cuddly creatures. These kids had claws, teeth, and a natural tendency to test every boundary they could find. Terex introduced them with a kind of pride that Nevin hadn't expected. "This is Rix," he said, nodding toward the smallest of the 3, whose tail was already twitching in anticipation. "That's Tova," he added, pointing at a youngling who was staring intently at the ceiling like it held secrets. "And this is Drin," he finished, motioning toward the one who had already started sniffing a nearby fire extinguisher. Marla leaned close to Nevin and whispered, "They don't look so bad." That's when Rix leapt onto a cargo crate, flipped upside down, and somehow activated a warning siren with their tail. It took 5 minutes to figure out how to silence the alarm. Drin had started chasing it like a game, and Tova had disappeared, briefly before reappearing from a maintenance shaft with what looked like half a circuit board in her mouth. Nevin rubbed his temples. This was going to be a long day. Dr. Lan Westra, the ship's medic, joined them a few minutes later. He took one look at the situation and sighed. "I've already prepped the infirmary, just in case." Despite the rough start, the younglings seemed eager to explore. That, unfortunately, was the problem. They didn't just look around, they tested everything. If there was a button, it got pressed. If there was a vent, they crawled into it. And if something sparkled, it was either chewed on or thrown. "Captain, we have a situation in the mess hall," came a voice over the comms. Rix found the gelatin dispenser. Nevin didn't even respond. He just groaned and started walking. By the end of the first hour, the crew had a new respect for Sarrak agility. Rix had scaled a wall panel and managed to disable the lights in half the ship. Tova was caught trying to reprogram a food printer, and Drin had made friends with the ship's cleaning drone, which now followed them around like a loyal pet. Oddly enough, the younglings weren't trying to be bad. They were just curious. Everything was new, and they seemed to want to understand it all at once. Marla tried to set up a learning station with visual aids and basic language cues, but she was immediately ignored in favor of chasing each other through the corridor. At one point, Tova paused to stare at her reflection in a metal panel. Marla knelt beside her, trying to engage. "That's you?" she said gently. Tova blinked and tapped the panel. Then she tried to lick it. Nevin had started keeping track of incidents on a tablet. So far, 1 lockdown triggered, 2 crew members mildly injured, 1 from tripping, the other from laughter, a coffee machine destroyed, and an emergency door sealed shut from the inside. Rix had declared the storage closet their base. Lan gave a dry update during the evening briefing. No injuries to the younglings, though I might need therapy. Yet something strange started to happen by the second day. The crew, despite the chaos, began to adjust. They started assigning watch shifts, pairing each youngling with a willing, or at least mildly brave crew member. Rix followed a mechanic named Juno, who taught him how to use tools while very carefully hiding the dangerous ones. Tova developed an obsession with data terminals, and was given a blank one to press buttons on to her heart's content. Drin became oddly attached to Hal Bren, the grumpy chief engineer, who grumbled constantly but always kept an eye on her. "They're not so bad," Hal muttered one evening as Drin curled up next to a heater, like having 3 small scaly hurricanes with good intentions. Marla watched them play in the rec room later that night. Tova was stacking data chips like blocks, and Rix was trying to teach Drin how to play a human card game, even though none of them understood the rules. There was something peaceful about the way they interacted, still unpredictable, but not dangerous, at least not immediately. "They're learning," Marla said aloud. Nevan nodded beside her. "And so are we." In the distance, a loud crash echoed down the corridor, followed by a giggle. Yes, a Sorak giggle. Nevan didn't even flinch. "I'll get the mop." And just like that, the Aurora Ridge began its journey into the most unpredictable mission of all, parenting. By the 3rd week, the Aurora Ridge was no longer just a starship. It was a classroom, a playground, and occasionally a war zone with nap breaks. Captain Nevin Silas was starting to believe that parenting alien children might be more complex than navigating wormholes. Still, something had changed. The chaos hadn't stopped, but now it had a rhythm. The crew had stopped panicking and started adapting. And most surprisingly, the younglings were adapting too. Rix, Tova, and Drin were slowly learning the rules of human interaction. Not perfectly and not without setbacks, but noticeably. They no longer activated alarms for fun, or tried to disassemble wall panels just to see what was inside. Instead, they had found something new to be obsessed with: human games. It had started when Kemi Rowan, one of the younger crew members, had offered Rix a puzzle cube. She'd just meant to distract him while she fixed a broken food printer. But instead of throwing it, biting it, or hurling it down the hall as expected, Rix had stared at it. Then he began turning it. Then he began growling at it. And then, without warning, he sat cross-legged on the floor and refused to move until he solved it. 2 hours later, he proudly held up the completed cube with a triumphant chirp. The rest of the crew applauded like he had just discovered a new star system. That small moment opened a door. Kemi, who had grown up playing strategy games and building models with her cousins, started introducing other games: memory cards, stacking, blocks, cooperative tablet games where 2 players had to solve logic problems together. The results were unexpected. Not only were the Sorak younglings surprisingly good at these games, they enjoyed them. And more than that, they played together. Marla, Kin, the ship's behavior specialist, watched them closely. What started as curiosity was turning into something else: bonding. Rix often helped Drin when she got stuck on a level. Tova started sorting blocks by color before building, even though she'd originally just hurled them in every direction. They started sharing, taking turns, even laughing, though Sorak laughter was more of a clicking sound that made the engineers nervous the first few times. Hal Bren, the chief engineer, was perhaps the most surprising convert. Once allergic to anything that involved children or noise, he found himself teaching Drin how to build basic circuits using harmless parts. She watched him work with intense focus and eventually started mimicking his methods. "She's got better hands than half my team," he said one morning, holding up a perfect soldering job she had done under supervision. And fewer complaints, too. The crew began to talk about the younglings less like guests and more like mischievous junior cadets. They still got into trouble. Tova somehow rerouted a ship-wide announcement system to play jungle sounds for an entire afternoon. But now the crew laughed instead of panicked. Dr. Lan Westra even created a youngling report log for daily updates written with the dry wit of a man barely keeping up. "They've stopped trying to eat everything," he wrote one day. Progress. Marla knew the real test wasn't whether the younglings could play games, it was whether they could handle real emotions, like frustration, fear, and disappointment, without lashing out. That came during a simple game of tag. In the ship's gym, Rix, always the fastest, accidentally knocked over Kemi, who twisted her ankle. The room fell silent as Rix looked down at her, clearly confused. She winced, trying to smile, and reassured him she was okay. Rix crouched beside her, making soft clicking noises. Then he backed away slowly and didn't move for the rest of the game. Later that evening, Marla found him sitting alone in the observation deck, staring out at the stars. She approached quietly and sat beside him. "She's not angry with you," she said softly. Rix didn't answer. "You didn't mean to hurt her. That matters." He made a low sound, almost like a sigh. Marla smiled gently. Being part of a group means caring when someone else gets hurt. Even by accident, that's not weakness, that's strength. The next day, Rix brought Kemi a drawing. It was crude, mostly squiggles and claws, but she grinned like he had given her a treasure. He sat with her the whole morning, silently, watching her rest her ankle and helping her fetch tools. That small moment said more than any report could. As the days passed, the games grew more complex. Kemi introduced them to earth music, and soon Tova was tapping rhythms with her claws. Rix began drawing constantly, mostly shapes and symbols, but occasionally pictures of the ship and crew. Drin asked Hal endless questions about gravity systems and thermal converters. The younglings weren't just imitating human behavior anymore. They were engaging with it, understanding it, and slowly becoming part of it. Captain Navan watched this transformation with quiet pride. It wasn't perfect. There were still accidents, still misunderstandings, still moments where someone had to dodge a tail swipe or prevent an unauthorized shuttle door from opening. But the fear was gone. These younglings, once viewed as weapons waiting to grow up, were now just kids. Strange, scaled, occasionally destructive kids, but kids nonetheless. And somehow amidst the floating stars and flashing consoles, they were learning what it meant to belong. They weren't just learning to play, they were learning to be friends. The accident happened on the 42nd day. Captain Nevin Silas had just finished his morning report when the alarm sounded, sharp, urgent, unmistakable. He barely had time to process it before his comm crackled to life. "Medical emergency on Deck 2. Civilian child injured. Repeat. Civilian child down." The words hit harder than a meteor strike. A visiting family from a nearby science vessel had docked that morning, and their young daughter had been touring the ship with a small group. Rix, Tova, and Drin had been in the same area. That's all Nevan knew. He didn't wait for details. He ran. When he reached Deck 2, the scene was chaos. The little girl was being helped by a medic, her forehead bruised but conscious. Her mother was beside her, shaken but calm. More surprising was the figure crouched just a few feet away. Rix. The Sorak youngling was hunched low to the floor, claws retracted, eyes wide, breathing fast and shallow. His scales had dulled to a pale gray, and he looked frozen in place. All around him, crew members were tense, watching carefully but not approaching. One wrong move could mean disaster. Nevin stepped forward, slow and steady. "What happened?" he asked quietly. One of the engineers answered. The kid slipped near the lift door. Rix caught her. He moved faster than anyone else. Nevin turned toward the girl, who nodded, still wiping her eyes. "I tripped. I was falling, and then he grabbed me." The medic confirmed it. Rix hadn't caused the injury. He'd prevented it from being worse, but he looked like he thought he was the one in trouble. Marla arrived seconds later, taking in the scene with a single glance. She knelt beside Rix, keeping her voice soft and level. "It's okay. She's safe. You did good." For a moment, there was no reaction. Then slowly Rix turned his head toward her. He made a soft, uncertain clicking sound. Marla smiled. "You helped. That's what friends do." The tension in his posture eased just a little. Later that day, after the girl and her family had returned to their ship and calm had returned to the Aurora Ridge, Nevin called a meeting. It wasn't just for the senior crew. He invited everyone who had worked with the younglings, Kemi, Hal, Lan, even the mess hall staff. Terex joined via holocom, his expression unreadable as always. Nevin stood at the front, arms folded, not hiding how tired he looked. What happened today was unexpected. It could have gone badly, but it didn't, because Rix chose not to react with fear or aggression. He protected someone, a human. That matters. There was silence. Then Hal cleared his throat. "I'll admit I didn't expect much when this whole thing started. But those kids, they're not monsters, they're just learning. They're curious," added Kemi. "They want to understand us. That's more than I expected from any Saurak." Terex's voice came through the speaker, low and thoughtful. "Your actions have exceeded our hopes. Our younglings are not only learning to live alongside others, they are forming bonds. That is a rare thing among our kind." Marla looked around the room. "They're not perfect. They still make mistakes. But they trust us. That trust isn't easy for them. Or for us. But it's real." The mood in the room shifted, like a weight had lifted. The crew wasn't just going through the motions anymore. They believed in what they were doing. The next day, Naven received a formal message from the Saurak Dominion. It wasn't full of political language or heavy titles. It was simple. "The trial has been a success. We request permission to continue the program, and we offer our alliance." Nevin read the message twice before forwarding it to Earth's diplomatic council. He knew this wasn't just about 3 kids anymore. It was about something bigger. A warrior race was choosing to change. And humanity, of all species, had been the spark for that change. Later that evening, Nevin visited the observation deck. The younglings were there, sprawled across the floor with Kemi, playing a quiet board game. Rix looked up as he entered and gave a small nod. Tova offered him a playing piece. Drin waved one of her many half-assembled gadgets. Nevin took a seat beside them and smiled. "I hear you've been busy saving lives." Rix clicked softly, a little shy. Tova placed a game card in front of him. The stars outside the window glittered like dust on black velvet. For a long time they played in silence. No alarms, no disasters. Just the sound of cards shuffling and the occasional victorious chirp. The end of the game, Drin looked up at Nevin and asked, "Will we still stay? After 6 moons?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I think we can make that work." They let out a quiet cheer, all teeth and joy. It wasn't the loud, wild celebration one might expect from Saurak. It was quiet, trusting, changed. In that moment, Nevin knew the mission had been more than successful. It had transformed something far deeper than he ever imagined. Not just in the Saurak, but in everyone.